And the idea is, why are those sections there? What is their job? And it's important to look at it like a team, I guess. So a team has various roles or jobs, and these sections perform specialized roles within the overall functioning of the report. Um, and at first, I want to take it over to Karen Nicely's book. I recommend it. Let's see if I can figure out how to change the screen that I'm sharing. Let's see. Yeah, okay. And so this is her book. It's a student handbook for writing in biology. This is the fifth edition, I believe. Yes, the 2017 edition. I have the fourth edition. Um, if you're going to be a graduate student, and if I were your graduate advisor, I would require you, even to the point of buying for you if you needed it, a version of this book. Um, it's um, it's so logical and it's so user friendly and reader friendly, and it's so on point. Um, and the whole book is really useful. I recommend the whole book. Although I admit I haven't read the whole book, but I have gone through the whole structure of the book. And with each revision or each edition, she improves upon the previous. And that's a sign for someone that's um, she's interacting with her readers, she's taking recommendations and applying the recommendations and continually improving the product. So this is a really good resource to get. I would recommend get the most recent edition whenever you choose to purchase one or beg for one. Um, it's um, it's continually improving. It's a good book. So some of the approaches in here, the introduction to the quote unquote scientific method. Um, this is really nice. It's basically ask questions, find answers to the questions, and then go into the hypothesis route, things like that. So this is very nicely laid out, and it reflects reality better than um, textbook definitions of the scientific method and illustrations of the method. The textbooks aren't wrong, they're just not as complete as what really happens. Um, so, um, then chapter 2, developing literature search strategy. Yes, database search strategies. Um, evaluating search results. Chapter 3, here we go. Reading and writing scientific papers. Um, if you could have two chapters in her book to really read, chapter 3 and chapter 4 would be the core with respect to understanding scientific reports and how to do those. Um, and let's see, here we go. Acquire information to go down. I'm looking. Here it is, chapter 4. Step-by-step instructions for preparing a laboratory report or a scientific paper. Now, this would apply to a written report submitted to a journal. It would apply to an oral presentation given on a stage, and it would also apply to a poster presentation, which is also intended to be a live presentation, but in a group, a large meeting format where there are many people presenting at the same time, and the audience mingles. They move throughout the presentation or the presentation space. Um, and so you can take this as just general recommendations for scientific reports. And so the format is what she talks about initially. And I pointed out the format of the poster presentation template for us And the question came up, what do you put in the results section? And that's the reason I'm going over this, because it was an excellent question, and it's one that I actually had not thought about this semester in addressing, and it is really important. Um, I think maybe in the past you were given the templates and you're given like these are the sections to do, and I know in 1108 lab, there's the fish lab, and some people don't put the sections in the correct order, and they're like, what the heck? And so I think it's really important to point out the purpose of the sections. And again, think of them as a team, and each player on a team has a certain role and position um, within the lineup or something like that. Excuse me. I'm not dying, at least not quickly. All right. Yeah, good. A slow death is better than a quick death, Jimmy. Okay, back to it. Start with the materials method section. So the inclination for introductory students, if they have to write a report, would be to start with the title, and then maybe the authors, and then maybe the abstract, and then the introduction, because those are the order of the presentation. The sections are presented in certain orders, but that's not how you construct a team. You assemble the team into positions last, and how you develop those sections needs to have a certain logic to it. And I agree with Karen here that the materials and methods section should be first. The reason I think it should be first is because it's the most truthful thing in the whole report. It needs to be done the day of the activity, or as soon to the day of the activity as possible. In fact, you keep laboratory notes or field notes if you do field work. Those notes are so important because they're the only real documentation, including videos, if you do videos and things like that. But it's the real documentation of what actually happened at a certain place and certain time. It's the most real thing there is. And that's where the observations are made. That's how the observations were made. It's how exceptions to the plans were worked on. It's the reality of things, and that needs to be done when the information is completely fresh in the author's mind, in the scientist's mind. Memories are actually not concrete things. Memories are very fluid things, and they change through time. And so it's important to get the facts down, get the descriptions down at the time of the physical act of doing them to the closest extent possible. Now, the materials and methods section is describing what you did or what was done. And so that brings up the tense. So the materials and methods section should be written in past tense. It's not what we planned to do, it's what we actually did. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially if you're just starting out writing reports in the 1108. You saw some of this in the 1107 labs too, but the tense for the materials and methods section needs to be in past tense because that's truthful. The stuff was done in the past, and so you just describe it as in the past. And then she goes on into the voice, questions about what first person, second person, etc. come up, and then what level of detail. And so a lot of times what you'll see is there's sort of a default statement like, well, the materials and methods need to be written such that someone else could come back in and know what you did and repeat what you did. And that's true. I don't like it that that's usually all that's said. There's usually not an explanation that goes with it. But the idea is that um, science, the knowledge produced by science, shouldn't depend on an individual. It should be a product of the field. And in order for someone to do, say, an experiment I did back in the 80s, you would need to read the paper and be able to tell from the materials and methods section what I did and reconstruct it even to the place. I did field work, and so you would need to know the geographic location, um, as well as the chemical analyses that I did, as well as the bacterial counting methods that I used, the radioactive isotopes that I used to measure bacterial growth. All those things you could repeat. And it really depends on the quality of my materials and methods section all the way back in 1987. The purpose of that, again, is that whatever one scientist finds isn't taken as accepted necessarily. It needs to be repeatable. It needs to be written in a way that someone could go back in to verify. And that's a functioning of science. And so that's really important there. So what do you do after the method section? You go straight to the results. This is what we measured in the materials section, method section, and this is what we found. And the important thing in the results section is you don't draw any conclusions. In fact, I haven't even mentioned questions yet, or hypotheses, possible answers. Okay? And so the important thing to realize is that in the results section, it's not a place to address the statistical results of your methods or of your statistical analyses. It's a place for information to be typed out in text, and it's a place for supporting tables and graphs. I'll say that again. It's a place for tables and graphs, as well as text written material. It's a written section. In the 1108 labs, the way it is right now, you're set up to fail basically because it suggests, I think in the fish lab, that the result section is just the graphs. And there's one line in the directions that says just in passing, oh yeah, I need to write this out. And that's complete failure. That's always a problem because it doesn't show a good example of what to expect. When I teach the lab, oftentimes I say, you need to present your results using visuals, but to a person who can't see the visuals. That means you need to have a text description of what the visuals are, what they're saying, and how they say it. And so that's a tough sort of concept to wrap your head around. But if you just think about it, your tables and graphics are there, and they need to be done well, of course. But then your reader can't see them. And so you have to write the section to describe them. And again, it's just describing what's there. What is this graph? What's the independent axis? What's the dependent axis? What's the range of the values along each axis? What are the units on these axes? What kind of plot is this? Is it a line graph or is it a scatter plot? Things like that. So again, you're reading to someone who can't see the graphic, but you're telling the reader what the graphic is, how it's structured, and what it says. But you don't interpret it. You don't say anything about statistical results. In terms of interpreting results, you can give p-values, you can give t-values, chi-square values, ANOVA results, regression correlation results, and all that. You just don't go to the step of interpreting the p-value. For the physiology, So in the 1108 lab, yeah, yeah, no, you don't really interpret the results. I think the purpose of the physiology, this is the stair step lab, I think, and the purpose of this one is just to show um, that you can measure bodily functions, changes in bodily functions, and then return to a normal status and things that you could learn from them. And you're not interpreting them in the sense of a clinical. You're not saying to this person, "Gee, you're going to die tomorrow because you're really out of shape" or something like that. That we don't go there in that lab, and that's really that lab is not set up for that anyway. It's not a clinical or applied situation. The way that if you were an athletic trainer or working in a doctor's office or something like that, you are working with the patient in that case, and the metrics and the measurements do apply to a specific situation. In that case, you do interpret them. And so, thank you, Jimmy. That's a really good point there. Yeah, fitness related, right? It's not necessarily, I mean, BMI. So when I teach the lab, I always have people that are athletic trainer type. They want to go into that field, and they actually know everything. And so the first thing I tell them is forget what you know, because in this lab, what you know doesn't apply. This is just sort of like a cartoon version of fitness. And again, the purpose of the lab is really just to give students a chance to learn to measure blood pressure, pulse, interact with each other, and think about the physiology and the homeostasis that's going on. So that's a really good point, Jimmy, and I agree, because it's usually the athletic trainer types or the physiology types that struggle with this lab because they know better. And yes, you do know better, but forget what you know for this lab. Just follow the directions, and you'll be okay. That's how I boil it down. So good points about interpretation and application of interpretations. The next section is making connections, and so this is the discussion section. You write that after the results section. And the discussion section is where you verbally describe and refer to the results, graphics, and tables, and you interpret them. And so this is the story of the data. You know, when you did the methods, you set up the study to measure certain things at certain times and places using certain methods, etc. You chose certain statistical analyses to do. In the results section, you showed and told, what's it called? Show and tell the results. And then now in the discussion, it's going to tell the story of what you found. And that's the discussion section. And you do include interpretation of statistical results in this section. And by the way, you know, the whole world seems to favor the ahas, saying that we found something here. Most of science, we don't find something. And it's important to share with the community that given this experiment, the way it was set up, the where and the whens, etc., we don't find a significant, a statistically significant result. Now, I just did a no-no. I said statistically significant because if I were teaching in a lab, I would say never say that, but I would need to explain why. But just keep the idea that no results or are good results. It's showing, given the parameters of the experiment, these were the outcomes. And if it doesn't discriminate between one or two hypotheses, it doesn't, but that's information. In reality, you're not going to come across people getting really excited about null results. And again, that's a cultural thing right now. But I just want to put the bug in the ear that no results is actually information. If you look at it in terms of information theory, which I don't know much about. So next is the introduction section. The introduction section um, is the background. It's the why we're doing this. Why did I do this experiment? Why do we measure these things? What did other people find before that we're trying to verify, or we're trying to relate this setting to a setting that they used? And so it gives the context for the experiment. The whole purpose of the experiment is there. And in the introduction, you would state specifically what the question is and what the hypothetical structure is. What are the hypotheses? And that goes in the introduction. You repeat it in the discussion, because in the discussion you're saying, like, well, we set up this experiment to do this, like what you have in the introduction, and that included a certain hypothesis. And then now here's the story. Here's the rest of the story. Given the results that we have, we're going to finish the story. And that's the guts of a report there, are those sections. Then we get into this abstract idea, and the abstract, honestly, is the hardest section to write. It's not a part of the main report. It's like a commercial for the report. And so is the title. The title is even a shorter commercial for the report. And the idea is that people use search engines to find information about what they want to study. And the search engines go through titles and they go through abstracts to look for certain keywords. And so what you need to do is to create an index, basically, in a way that would allow someone to detect a title of interest. And once they detected the title of interest, they can go in and read or search the abstract to see if it was really closely related to what their interest was at that point in time. And so again, she calls it effective advertising, and that's good, because it's basically putting it into the universe and saying, here's this report, and here's the title with some words indexed, and then here's the abstract of what we found, what we meant to do and what we found. And now it's up to the researcher, which could be you doing a literature search, to decide, is this paper worth flagging in order to read in more completeness. And so this is a very useful, within the scientific community, a very useful section. But again, they're not really part of the body of the report. But it's an important, these are important tools to include along with the paper or the poster. And again, the abstract, I'm just going to tell you right up front, is the hardest section to write. And I'll leave it up to Karma to for you to discover why I say that. As you start writing things, you'll see, you'll remember, like, oh, now I see what he means. I don't know how to tell you what I mean, and it's something you just have to experience there. Okay, documenting the sources. Typically, whoever you're writing the report for, whether it's a journal or a scientific presentation to a meeting, they will say what formats to use, including the source system. And so here's 3 of the typical methods to use for sourcing in science. And then she gives also unpublished work you can cite, and then personal communication that you can cite also. So this is a really good section. And she also, in the previous chapter, even says why you should do a good job at this. And it really has to do with professionalism. In school, it's often taught that you have to do the citations because of legal reasons. Well, that's true, but that's not really the fun reason or the important reason. Well, it is important if you get sued. The reason is that it shows you know what you're doing. People in the field know, if you cite certain people, that, oh yeah, she's done her homework. Or they're like, oh, I get it. She's talking about what this person said this way in this experiment that she's doing, and I understand that connection. So the purpose for these citations is to communicate with other scientists. and to not make yourself look bad. Um, and so that gets into the quality of the sources that you select. You know, I have a lot of students in lab reports that cite wiki. Um, that's, as a professional, not a really wise thing to do. And so just be aware of that. Okay, and then she goes into internet, and I'm not going to go through that. But again, let's put it this way. When I did research, I had undergraduate students working for me. I would give them a list of papers to go to the library, a list of titles, to go to the library, look them up, find them in the stacks, take them to the copy machine and copy them, staple them, and number them according to a system I had, and then bring them back. And that was hours and hours and hours. That's the way we did it back then. Now this information sources are quickly available. I could still hire people to do this for me, but it would be so much more efficient. And the reason you hire undergraduates to work with you is to train them. And to pay them. You want to give people early in their careers chances to actually participate in research. And I encourage all of you, KSU is morphing more into a research-oriented institution, and that provides really good opportunities for undergraduates to participate, even if it's just doing database searches. It's important because you get to see the inner workings of a working group, of a scientific group. So I do encourage that. I'm not a researcher anymore, so I can't help you with that. But I do value it, I can tell you that. Then the beautiful idea of revisions. So, how's my time doing? 9:30, okay. So, this is the part that hit me like a wall. When I wrote my master's thesis, it took months and months and months. And the thing is, I didn't really know all this information that I just went through with you guys. And I thought it had to be just the facts, nothing but the facts. And it was just like a bunch of dead bones. It was just horrible. And my major professor said, start over. So here you go. After 2 years of work, you start over. So then I took a different approach because, metacognition, we learn if something doesn't work, change. So I took a different approach, and I figured out to look at these reports the way I've described them as players or role players within an overall team. And they had certain jobs to tell an overall story. So I took a storytelling approach, and that is where it clicked for me. So the next draft went through just fine with minor revisions. The point is that when you're getting into revisions, it could be something that may take you just a couple of weeks to resolve, or maybe a couple of years. And so it's important to realize that revisions are really important because the end product is what you're after, the quality of the product. When you get revisions or get people to read your papers, at that point you're using the scientific community, you're using your peers, and they are criticizing you for the purpose of improving it. Almost always. Not always. There is some, scientists are people, and they do bicker sometimes. So those social processes do occur. But the bigger picture idea is that when I wrote my master's thesis and I published it, it was the product of not just me, it was the product of the reviewers, of my major professor, of my funding sources, and it was the biggest lesson I had at the time was going into writing it. I thought this would be my product, and when I was done, I realized it was a cultural product. It was a product of a culture, and that was a huge thing to learn and appreciate because that's the way these things are. Okay, so again, I highly recommend Nicely's book, Karen Nicely. Um, she's done a really good job at this book. And again, if you're interested in continuing in science, and no matter where you go as a professional, you're going to be writing reports. And so you'll want to have something, if not this book, something like this book available to you. And there is, of course, the digital version is available. And this is through Macmillan. Um, so I've used her book basically just then to go through the steps of the slides for today. Let me share those back. Share content, share screen. Here we go. So now we're back to this screen. So this is on D2L again. And the difference here is these, before I reviewed her book again, these are the, when I teach lab, this is the order that I go through when I teach lab. And again, Dr. Nicely's sequence is a little bit different to this, but you'll see that there are some crossovers. The methods section first, that's what she said, that's what I say. The results section second, same thing. Introduction, same thing. Discussion, same thing. And then I put in literature cited, or the references section. I think she did too, but I don't remember exactly what order. But this is where you provide the scientific or the professional context for the work that you're doing, whether it's a poster or a published paper. And so, to me, it logically falls right in here. This isn't the order they go in the report. I'm sorry, let me make that clear. This is not the order they go in the report. This is the order I'm saying that you logically do these activities. Next are the acknowledgments, and then the title, and then the dreaded abstract, and then the list of authors. And so then that's the structure that I'm saying, and then of course hers corresponds to that pretty closely. Now, the last thing I want to do today is to switch over to the template again and demonstrate the template. Hopefully for the last time. I know you guys are probably tired, but I want you to see it in the context of what I've gone over today. And here's the template. Okay, Daniel, I'll come right back to that. The answer is yes, but I'll go right back to that. So here's the file that I posted. And again, this is if you go to view, I'm in PowerPoint right now, and this is the notes page view, so you could read my notes. And so I've described it, and some instructions are here to use it. What I want to point out now is I just want to go over the sections, and so I'm going to change the view to normal view. There we go. And highlight the sections. So the first thing I created, if this were my report, the first section that I actually did was the methodology section. And you'll see that it's listed in the third position, which is traditional. That's good. And the methodology, then the results. And so here's the results section. That includes words and the graphics that go along with the words, including tables. Okay, so here's the heart, and then the discussion section. So this is the heart of the body of the report. But then you go over to the introduction. So this is the traditional order of presentation, not the order of doing the work, but the order of presentation. There's the template for the organization that you're working with. There's the title of the report, and it needs to be a descriptive title. again, because with words that a search engine could find and understand what you were, um, uh, what the report was about. And so this was a title of a piece I did. And dissolved organic carbon is fairly well understood within aquatic research. A spring seep was not a. It's not really the best in the current age because it's vague. Is that springtime or is it a spring um, source of water, which is what it was? Uh, but this was a literary reference to an earlier paper that someone wrote, and they used the spring seep thing. And when I wrote this, it was before the internet was made publicly available. There weren't the search capabilities. And so if I did this now, I would need to revise that title. But at the time, it was in the context of history, it was meaningful at the time. And again, we hired people to find these documents. Um, and if you didn't hire them, you did it yourself. But then if you do it yourself, you're being stingy and not letting people learn. And so it's just inner workings of science. The authority of the authorship. So the authors go here, and when I put the authorship on the list, I put it last. Good questions. That's good. All right, and so I'm going to speed through this in order just to get to your good questions first. So there's the title, there's the authorship. The other thing down here are the disclosures. Disclosures have to do with who paid for the work. If I was doing work on a drug, for example, and the drug company paid me to do it, you need to know that I was paid by the drug company. It would be unethical to not share that. Grants, government grants, acknowledgments. Who assisted me? Who were my peer reviewers that did agree to have their names known? And so that's this section. If your particular report doesn't need that, you highlight it and you delete it. It goes away. Okay, so abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion. Some have conclusions, some don't have conclusions. It's just up to whatever the situation is. And then the literature cited section. And the key to the literature cited section is that this needs to be not just a list of relevant papers, but it needs to be a list of things that you actually cited in the body of the paper. And only those things. And so now then, is there a guide anywhere on how to properly cite sources or research? Yes. First off, the book that I showed you has it in it. But also, if you go to the KSU library, there's undergraduate research tab. And then under there, you will find resources for how to cite manuscripts of various kinds. And so it is in there. There, you'll want to verify with whoever you're writing a report for to say which particular version. I mean, I always require the last name and year version. It used to be called the Chicago style. And it's not MLA, it's a different one. But apparently people going through school learned a lot about MLA. But in my particular subfield, we didn't use MLA. The key is that you just need to know which version your target is expecting, and then use that version. So you'll not always use the same version. It honestly depends on the journal that you're writing to, on which version. So again, through your library resources, undergraduate research tab, and also there's a librarian there that you can email if you need further assistance there. By the way, that's why they are there, is to help you with your reports, help you with your work. That's their reason for existing, and you pay for it. So they're helpful people, and they just need people to help. Shannon, so if we're doing this for an organization and not experiment, how will we know what data and graph? Okay, so let's say on the current assignment where you're describing an organization that you're interested in. Let's say I did the Ecological Society of America. I would present in the introduction. I would say the purpose of this report is to describe the Ecological Society of America from the standpoint of a student potentially interested in a career in ecology, something like that. And so, and then you could say, the questions I have would be on, do they have student memberships, or how much does it cost, or what are the career opportunities through this organization? So just list some of the questions that you want to address. And it's the same thing if you're doing an experiment, because you would have questions. But in this case, they're not hypotheses, these are facts. So you have a question, the resource has there's a resource for factual answers. And so that would be the introduction. Methodology, where did you search? How did you search? Did you interview someone? And so how did you gather the information to help you answer the questions that you were researching? The results, what did you find? And here's a good place to use graphics. For example, a table could be used to show membership classes and annual costs. So you could say, students, regular or retired, different kinds of membership and categories, and the costs for the annual memberships. So you could use graphics like that. You could do, if you found what's the makeup of the organization in terms of ethnicity and race, and of course you could do a pie graph in that case. And so think in terms of the results as these are the actual answers to my questions, and how can I best display these answers on a poster that by design would be something that I could be pointing to and talking to my audience at the same time. Now the results are just results. The discussion is where you tie it all together. This is where you tie the results and the introduction back together. Okay, that makes sense. That's the whole reason I'm doing this. That's good. You just acknowledged my reason for existence today. And then you can give or take conclusions. I usually don't. But again, you could see a journal that would say you need to have a conclusion section, and so you would. And a conclusion section would be basically a restatement of the initial question and the answer. It really narrows it down there. But the discussion section is where you're telling the outcome, the story of, okay, this was, in the discussion you would repeat what you had in the introduction, in the sense of, the purpose of this report was to explore the Ecological Society of America from a early professional perspective, and then you can go on and then describe what you found. And also, if you want to make a judgment, a decision about something, is something good or bad about the organization, that would go in the discussion section. So again, your opinion goes in the discussion section, and that is appropriate. The abstract, have fun with the abstracts. And basically the abstract needs to have more information than the title does, but less information than the whole report does, but you tell the same story. So basically, what is the question? How do they generally approach finding answers? These were the answers I found, and this is what I think about it. There you go. I guess that's a good way of saying something like that. This is an individual assignment. I'm hoping to get it to where I can put you into groups. I've never done it yet. That's why I'm saying I'm hoping. And so you can share within groups and get a sense of sharing these posters like a poster presentation would be. But again, because I've not done it before, I don't have proof of concept that I could carry out the technical side. But I'm considering trying it. You guys are going to be proof of concept or not, basically. So don't stress over it, but there is value in just going through the process of answering questions and presenting the posters. During when we teach the class live in Science 109, again, these posters are printed or reconstructed economically, and students do present as groups to other students, and there are assignments associated with that. But in their current situation, I've not been able to pull that off. So that's my answer, and it was more of an answer than you asked for, I guess. Cool. Okay, guys, that's all for the presentation today. If you have more questions about any of this, again, I'm happy to work with you on there. Just need to communicate with me. We can have individual meetings if you wanted, or if you wanted to get together in small groups, study groups or something like that.